Chris projecting as Pontas, the arch, that was definitely another inflection point. I mean, that to me, that's always been just in terms of pure hard movement and aesthetics, visuals for rock climbing. It was kind of the pinnacle of a fantasy of what a climb could be for movement, visuals, badassness, And he spent a long, long time working on that. Brett, my brother, spent weeks and weeks with him there over the course of whatever it was, a year and a half or so, as Chris was working on it, filming it. And when he finally did it, we were always hoping that would be the finale for the King Lines film, and it was. And I think that's an iconic moment in the history of rock climbing, and something that at the time when we captured it, and I had the feeling of like, cool, we did it. Like, like in terms of pure difficulty and visuals, I don't know that we can do better than that. Like, some climbs are gonna be much bigger, some things are gonna have deeper stories, whatever. But in terms of just like pure badass rock climbing, starting from a bouldering / sport climbing perspective, I don't think you can possibly get any cooler.
Josh Lowell, welcome to the Testpiece podcast, man. Good to get you in front of the camera instead of behind it.
Josh Worsley, hello. Nice to be in touch with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude, I think you're the first Josh I've interviewed. Good name, man. Well, thanks for coming on. Thanks for getting a haircut to look extra sharp, since now it's not just audio these days. We also put you on YouTube. For those of you who don't recognize your name, you should, because Josh is one of the main people behind all of your favorite climbing films, all of my favorite climbing films. So just going to speak for everyone. You're the founder of Big Up Productions, Real Rock. You've just been involved with basically all of the most iconic climbing films over the years. We're talking Rampage, Dosages, King Lines, every freaking Real Rock. Also the director of the Dawn Wall too, right, man?
True.
Love that one. Dude, you even won 2 Emmys along the way. What did you win the Emmys for?
One was for cinematography on King Lines, and one was for feature doc on The Alpinist.
Dude, really good. King Lines, definitely, when that came out, I feel like the idea of King Lines, I don't know, just that idea of perfect, epic, beautiful lines is something that maybe hadn't just entered my psyche. And then the idea of aesthetics and, the climb on the cliff that you must do really became like entrenched in my, just my ethos of what I wanted to go out and climb. And I'm just wondering what the backstory on how King Lines came to be was.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. It's funny because that word, the actual phrase King Line, and the concept of it actually came from Clem Loscott. He's the first person who I heard use that term, and he was in Hampi when I was there with Sharma, and we were filming Pilgrimage, and those guys were climbing together, and that's the first time I heard anyone use that phrase. Like, if you walk up to a cluster of boulders in that case, and you're looking around just trying to decide what to climb, your eye settles on the King Line, the big one, the proud one, the beautiful one, the hard one. And that is a vision that I think Chris always had in his climbing from the outset, and really has made him stand apart in the pursuit of his climbing, and something that we adopted as well in terms of, looking for what to film. And Clem was quite an artist and a philosopher in his climbing as well. And so those two really vibed pretty well on that level. And then us being there looking at climbs through the lens of what would film well and what would be fascinating to watch and inspiring to watch. We kind of all adopted his phrase and carried it over. Chris started using it when he was talking about searching for the world's most amazing climbs. And then it ended up, becoming the title of the film. And there's a little bit of a double meaning just with the word king. Chris over the years has kind of emerged as the king of climbing from that generation. And I think that's kind of persisted, now when he posts something on Instagram, people are putting the crown emoji on there and stuff. So that's kind of carried through, but it was kind of fun that it first came from Clem, that concept.
You just put the crown emoji on his post. I saw that.
I'm not the only
uh,
one.
yeah. It's cool because I sought them out. I gotta tell you, when I saw the footage of Los Humildes Picasa in Oleana, I was like, whoa, that looks cool. It's just like a tufa that goes for days. It's kind of what you always wanted a limestone tufa climb to be.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, when I showed up, it lived up to the hype. And that's not always the case. Sometimes you see something on Instagram, and especially boulders, and you'll go and you'll think to yourself, wow, look at this line, look at that rail. And then you get there and you're like, where is it? Oh, it's down in that hole. Bummer. So
For
I love
sure.
that eye you guys had, that you guys came together and showcased. Yeah, changed my life.
Yeah, I mean, we're searching out the big, proud, amazing things. At the same time, not everything is going to be perfect that you film. So then what you're talking about comes into play. So you have to you have creative framing, you have some leeway. It's like, okay, this climb isn't the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, but we're filming it. So what's cool about it? And how do we focus on what's unique and cool about it? Okay, it's the holds. Maybe it's in some shitty location next to the highway or something, but if the holds are really special, that can be enough to get people psyched. So then when you show up, you might be like, "Oh my God, why is all this traffic going by?" But
I
those
mean,
aren't those aren't the king lines, but those are, that's an important part of showing all sides of climbing as well.
yeah, and that's just my predisposition. I like the big, tall lines, and sometimes other people feel differently. And you totally made me think of, I went to China and climbed there, and there's a cliff there called Lei Pishen. Oh, it's been a while, but it's a cool cliff, but it's literally right on the road, and you just hear loud trucks going by the whole time. It doesn't have quite that in the nature vibe that I think the video suggested, but artistic license.
Yeah, Virgin River Gorge too is a classic example.
Mm, mm. Well, Josh, you've been doing this stuff for decades, man, and you were on the cutting edge, part of the cutting edge, showing us what the cutting edge is in climbing. And I, I want to hear how it all started, man. Take me to the beginning. How'd you get into climbing?
Well, I grew up in New York. I live in New York now again, and I started climbing when I was 16. I was in high school. I took a lesson in the Gunks. I live about an hour from the Gunks, which is an amazing classic area with incredible traditional climbs, beautiful, and a great place to learn because it has hundreds of climbs that are a couple pitches, really aesthetically pleasing and all traditional and really easy to protect. Like a lot, not all easy to protect, but lots of easy stuff where you can place gear. So that's where I learned to climb. In high school, it was 1988, and I was just immediately hooked. I mean, I loved the movement, the adventure, the battle with yourself, the mental aspect. I just latched on immediately. Got a rope, started top roping at some little nearby local areas, and going up to the gunks when I could, and learning how to place gear and having little mini epics and stuff like that. And I went to school in Colorado. I went to Colorado College. That's where I met Peter Mortimer, who I ended up teaming up with to create Real Rock. And that's where I started kind of climbing year round, climbing at Shelf Road in the winters. After my first year there, the first climbing gym in Colorado Springs opened. So I started, actually climbing indoors for the first time. There weren't many gyms back then, but that was a game changer. And I just got deeper and deeper into it. Um, After college, I studied geology in school. And after school, I decided to take a year off before going to grad school to just climb because I was really obsessed, needed to kind of like get it out of my system for a year. And I did the kind of like seasonal climbing bum thing. I was working as a guide in Aspen, guiding on Independence Pass, sleeping in my truck, bussing tables, saving up money, traveling all fall, coming back east in the winter, working in a new gym here, doing comps, like starting to try to climb hard, doing competitions and stuff, little local comps back when it was just not that big of a deal. And then in the spring, I'd travel again and end up back in Aspen. So that year turned into 3 years as I just got sucked in deeper and deeper. Ended up kind of letting go of my grad school aspirations, just getting deeper and deeper into the climbing world. And during that time, I started writing articles for the climbing magazines. Those were kind of the dominant form of climbing media at that time, mostly rock and ice, a little bit for climbing as well. I wrote a bunch of feature articles kind of while I was on the road and when I was back east, and kind of, I don't know, I was always into writing. It was something that was natural for me. I never did well with like having to take rest days and not using my brain. I always had a need to just like do something, make something. So on rest days, I would write or I don't know, take photos, stuff like that. I grew up with cameras. I always was used to that stuff. And pretty much it was an injury that made me start filming. In 1997, I was spending the spring climbing with a bunch of friends, bouldering in the Gunks. And, you know, the Gunks has this long history. It's like one of the most historic climbing areas in the country. And people had always done a little bit of bouldering here and there, but it had never really been a focus. And even bouldering in general at that time in 95, 96, 97, it was, you know, it was mostly considered practice climbing unless you were in Hueco or, you know, some people in Bishop at that time. You know, everywhere else, it was just sort of an afterthought. And we had a small crew of friends that were really excited about bouldering at that time. Myself, Jason Keel, Ivan Green, Obi Carrion, my brother Brett, who's was like the baby of the group, and a few other like guys from New Jersey and stuff. We just had this like really kind of tight, excited crew, and we were just that's what we were doing. We were just going bouldering, you know, 3, 4 times a week, excited about new zones, developing problems and stuff like that, and taking it serious as a pursuit on its own, but also just like having so much fun, being silly, fucking around, like having fun in a way that at the time and even looking back, it felt pretty unique as a little cultural slice that people in the greater climbing community weren't aware of. I blew out a finger at a comp. We were all competing against each other. That's how we had all met. I blew out a finger in a comp. I had kind of nothing else going on, and all these guys were going out doing first ascents every day, and I was so jealous that I couldn't go and fight for the FAs. And so I just started coming along and bringing a little crappy video camera and just documenting it, not with the idea of making a career, certainly, just because I had not much else to do, and I always had a creative urge to try and, you know, capture whatever it was I was doing. And so my first video came out that summer. It was called Big Up Bouldering in the Gunks. So BIG stands for Bouldering in the Gunks.
Oh,
And I was
cool.
kind of riffing on that big, and then it got me to Big Up. I was listening to a lot of reggae at the time. It was kind of a East Coast vibe kind of thing, that phrase. And I made this video that really was just for my friends and me, you know, put some random music on there, put some Modest Mouse on there, put some hip hop, put some weird club music that we were hearing in New York at that time, and just tried to have fun with it and get some laughs. And, you know, it was like a psych video for us as friends. Played it at a party. Everyone was kind of blown away, and slowly started to get requests to kind of put it out there to the world. And I did that, and people were excited about it. The magazines wrote reviews, and Pusher and Cordless, Clark Shelk wanted to sell it on VHS tapes, and I started to kind of think, maybe there's something here that I can contribute, or maybe there's a spark here that feels new to people, and that was the initial start.
Haven't heard the word cordless in a while. When you were
I
talking
know.
about bouldering, I was like, I wonder if he had some cordless pads.
Oh, that's all we had, man. Like 2 or 3 skinny little cordless pads. That's why we all used to like be super scared if we were more than 6 feet off the ground. We used to spot by basically like touching each other a little bit, and we used to get hurt all the time. If you fall off anything big, that's really changed a lot.
What's funny is you said skinny little cordless pads, and they are or they were, but they were also like the luxury pad. Like those were the best pads though. So
Yeah, that's all. That's all there was. I mean, Clark started it out of his van in Waco.
what other climbing films were going on at this time? I started climbing maybe in '94 or something. I'm trying to like remember what videos I saw. I want to say there was like kind of Masters of Stone. I saw some of those. I remember West Coast Pimps came out at some point. That was kind of my
A little
crew, the
later,
the
yeah,
West Coast
yeah.
side of things. But yeah, what was the media landscape in general like back then?
Well, the magazines were dominant. They were big and they were filled with ads, and you would basically get the magazine and flip through it and see what somebody had sent, 3 or 4 months ago before their deadline. And big articles. I mean, when I was writing articles for the magazines, those were like, I'd get like paid decently, and I'd write 3,000 word articles, and they'd send out a photographer to come with me and shoot photos. And it was like it was like a real business back then, and now it's just gone, which is striking. But and so in the video side, I mean, there had been a few like standalone kind of artsy documentary films about climbing, old school stuff that I had seen like on the Banff tour or something. Somebody rope soloing something in El Cap or something like, or in Yosemite, something like that. And those are cool. But as far as like people really trying to document climbing, there was the Masters of Stone films, which were pretty popular, and they were like, my impression at the time was that I was never that into them. They were well shot, they were well produced. They had a lot of the top climbers in them. The vibe was not something I identified with. It was very SoCal, heavy metal, um, mullets, flexing, weird skits of guys throwing each other off cliffs, trying to win the Olympian goddess, wearing a weird dress, and people climbing waterfalls with ice axes. I mean, to me, it didn't represent what I was excited about in the sport of climbing, the movement and the culture, and the realness. It was all like well produced, but also like heavily, heavily posed in a way that you kind of want to see, like, okay, what's the hard new climb that Boone Speed put up, or what's Dean
Yeah.
Potter doing? But then you watch it and you're kind of like, is this real? Like, they're just kind of like flexing to the camera and all this stuff. And I never like felt it, I respected it, but I didn't really feel it personally. And then the next guy who started putting stuff out was Mike Call. And his videos were the opposite: super underground, super rough and core, but very, very real. He's literally just out there with a handheld little camcorder filming his buddies battling for first ascents and little cottonwood and stuff in his first videos. But his buddies are like Boone Speed and some of the other like best climbers in the country doing really cool shit, and he's showing you a bit of the process and the energy, and he's putting some kind of like SLC punk music on there that kind of has a skater vibe, and those got me way more psyched as far as reflecting the culture and being real. And I think my thought when I went into, I really respected what Mike was doing. And shout out to Mike, who's still doing it. MC's like been in the game for years and years, and he's still making cool projects, and a lifer in the climbing game, and has turned into a really good filmmaker. And we've collaborated many times over the years. But his stuff got me psyched to go in the woods behind my house and look for some scrappy little 2-move boulders and like actually throw down on them. And I kind of in my mind was thinking, I want to represent the reality of climbing and bouldering in particular at that time the way he's doing, but I feel like because of my background, could probably bring a little more production value to it in terms of just being a little more artistic with the shooting, um, leaning into the editing, having a background in writing, like trying to maybe bring a little story or at least context to it, and switching up the vibe to reflect our kind of East Coast energy a little bit. That was kind of my starting point.
You, yeah, when you said earlier that you loved writing and you were writing for Climate Magazine, that you studied geology, I was maybe a little surprised, or just, because what you just said there, you were like, I can bring my own artistic background, maybe a little bit of storytelling, which is clearly related to writing. But tell me about how you switched into, I mean, dude, you're one of the best to ever do it in climbing films. And, you probably didn't learn that studying geology.
Well, probably. I mean, I guess the third piece of it. I mean, geology. Yeah, didn't really inform it. Although I do know a lot about the rocks we're climbing on. But the writing, and then the other piece of it is that I grew up with cameras. My father was a cinematographer, and he invented a bunch of lighting equipment. He started a company called Lowell Light, making lighting equipment, which was like the first really lightweight, portable, interchangeable lighting kits. I mean, he started in 1959, so like he was a ship's photographer in World War II on an
Whoa.
aircraft carrier, and then gradually built this long career. So I grew up with cameras. He made a film when I was 6, a short documentary that was nominated for an Academy Award, starring me and my younger brother, my middle brother Evan, who's not part of the climbing scene like my other brother Brett is. But there was a short documentary, like kind of a day in the life of sibling relationship that was won all these awards and went to all these film festivals and stuff. So I kind of, I had that in my background. I always had a camera growing up. I always took photos. I had an aesthetic sense, I think, from that. So when I started messing around with, filming and thinking about how to put stuff together, um, I think, just having the visual sense of how to shoot things well and having a sense as a writer of how to kind of give some context, tell a story, even if it's not too deep in those years, I think that helped a lot. I was able to bring that stuff into the game.
Yeah, let's lean more into hearing about this kind of vision that you brought where we had Masters of Stone, which when you started talking about those, like what came to mind for me was there was something where they were dancing on ropes. It was like a bunch of non-climbers dancing, hanging off of a cliff. And yeah, that
So
one,
that's actually
yeah.
really funny because I think that's Bandaloop, this group that's been around forever. Bandaloop is like they're on Broadway now, and I think they're going to get nominated for
Whoa.
for a Tony this year, which is kind of amazing. So respect to them. But yeah, it was a little surprising to see that have a big part in a cutting edge climbing film at the time.
Okay, they may have been awesome, but 8-year-old me
Yeah.
didn't care. I like Dan Osmond flipping me off or whatever on the, I like that energy. Uh, so something that we also talked about is I had said to you, Josh, like I like those films like King Lions because they were just badass, and I wanted to feel like climbing was badass because I felt like it was badass, dude. Take anyone up onto Los Humildes Picasa, get them, 15 feet above their bolt and pumped, and you'll feel badass. But tell me about, let's go deeper into the vision and the niche that you leaned into when you were first starting and separating yourself from those around you.
Yeah, I mean, I think specifically when I started with the first film, Big Up, and then the second one, Free Waco, the vision was really around celebrating bouldering. That's what I was doing. That's what I was excited about. That's what felt really new and fresh in the climbing scene. Um, and and I think I just felt like I felt like we had a spark of energy in the coming out of the East Coast, and it was happening around the country too, in little pockets. Of people who were young and excited about bouldering as its own pursuit in a way that certainly a few people had done in the past. We weren't inventing it, but it was starting to really bubble up. And I think in the past it used to be like, oh, you do a road trip and you go to Joshua Tree and you do those kind of climbs. You go to Yosemite, you try some cracks. Maybe, some people get, and you go to Waco in the winter and you do your little bouldering session, but that's it. And so we started to see people really developing bouldering as its own thing all over the country. And I was part of that here in the Northeast. And we had just, this crew that was excited about it, that was bringing a different energy. And I just really wanted to, I don't know, I just thought it was something cool to celebrate. Like, I just thought I wanted to show people that bouldering was cool, that hard climbing is cool, that it's not all about Mount Everest. In those days, if you told someone you were a climber, they're just like, oh, are you doing Everest? They're like, oh, you don't fall and die, and that's all people knew. Some guy with a beard and a backpack hiking up a snowy mountain. And it wasn't that, it was this incredible, youthful, athletic, and artistic pursuit of envisioning things and going deep into what the limits of what's possible for the human body in terms of movement, the mental puzzle involved, the group energy of like competitiveness, but supportiveness at the same time. And it was just something that I was in love with, and I felt like hadn't been hadn't the world hadn't seen it yet, and I just wanted to show the world this thing that I felt really passionate about it. That was as simple as it was at the beginning.
I got bad news, dude. People still think I mean Everest when I say I climb, or now because the Olympics, they think maybe it's speed climbing, or maybe I am, climbing without a rope like Alex Honnold, trying to risk my. So there,
Yeah.
you've done a lot, but boy, people still have interesting thoughts about climbing. Uh, so what was kind of like some of these big inflection points where it went from, oh, this was a video that I showed my buddies, they thought it was kind of cool, and it sounded like Clark over at Cordless started, pushing some stuff towards VHS. But what were some moments where you went from just, the injured guy that picked up a camera to a professional?
Well, I think for sure a big inflection point was meeting Chris Sharma. and connecting with him. And that happened in 1998. I met him in Waco. I had gone down there with my buddy Obi from New York. You know, we had gotten close climbing together in the Gunks. He made the decision to spend the entire winter in Waco Tanks, see how far he could push his bouldering, and he went down there just slumming it. You know, like working at Pete's Quonset hut as the guy who collects the camping fees in exchange for being able to sleep there for free, you know, and just see what he could do, see how far he could push his bouldering. And I decided to spend a big chunk of the winter down there with him and kind of, it was kind of my first attempt to like actually make a movie, you know, because the first Big Up thing was really just a video with music and fun footage, but there wasn't any story really holding it together. This time I decided, all right, let me try to make a story about what it's like to live full time on the road as a climber, as a boulderer, to be in this scene. Let me tell little stories about the different characters who are going to be there. Let me see who we meet, follow some characters, and just try to really convey what it's all about to live this life, because it's a really like interesting and special and non-conventional life. So I ended up narrating the story through my eyes of like being excited to go down and spend a winter there, being a climber, of course, being injured again. I mean, I don't think I ever would have made films if I was less injury prone. So that was part of it. You know, beginning by following Obi on his journey, being down there and having all this like raging ambition to just see what he could do, you know, and then kind of branching out onto the different climbers who he met or I met. And one of those people was Chris. Chris showed up and was just, you know, he was 16 at the time. He was already pretty much known as the strongest in the world. Um, he had already done like the hardest first ascents in the U.S. He was working on Biography, which later became Realization at the time. And when he came there, he had just come from Soyuz, I think, recently, and was talking about this legendary project that he thought he could do. He still had a little bit of a punk attitude at that time. He wanted the French had or the person who bolted it had named the route already, as was their practice, named it Biography, and Chris wanted to name it Get a Life, which is kind of a diss. Thankfully, he didn't. But he kind of, you know, he had a little edge to him, but also just had this goofy, young, wide-eyed beginner's mind about climbing that was incredibly striking to me at the time. You know, all the people kind of my generation. I'm 9 years older than Chris. The people that I kind of like was following, who were doing comps and doing hard sport routes. There's a whole different like vibe and culture at that time. It was a lot darker. You know, guys were starving themselves and talking about how you have to like you know, Jim Carn had to like live in a cave in the south of France eating only potatoes for 3 years before he could like climb 514, you know. And that was kind of the ethos, very overtly competitive, psyching each other out in ISO before comps and stuff like that. And Chris was just the opposite. He was just joyfully climbing whatever the fuck he felt like climbing. He didn't have a spreadsheet. He didn't care what he ate. He mostly ate gummy bears on that trip, from what I can remember. It was like his main sustenance. Um, and he wasn't looking in a guidebook to see which was his next thing to check off to complete his list. He didn't give a shit what anybody else climbed or did. He just walked around and was just like, whoa, look at that. Let's climb that. And everyone else, I mean, you know, Obi and myself, we were there, like Boone Speed was there. We were climbing with him a lot. A lot of other top climbers would just sort of go, I don't know, that's not a problem, dude. Or like, I don't know, that's kind of high. Or like, I don't think there's any holds, you know. Nobody really could share that vision that Chris had. And that didn't matter. He would just hone in on something, throw down 2 or 3 pads and just start up, sometimes with his sneakers on, and then everyone else would be like, "Oh shit, he's halfway up! Like, quick, throw some pads under him!" Like, and he would just follow his vision. That's all that mattered, and it was so unique and refreshing. And he was just such a sweetheart. And you know, he and Obi got really close really quick, and I got really close with him as well through that process. And basically, you know, connecting with him really shaped the trajectory of the next few projects. After a while, the next thing we decided to do was Rampage, which was like, all right, let's plan something from the beginning based around Chris and let's see how we can expand it and go a little broader with it. And, never look back from then. I mean, we've been connected since then, and he's still, one of my closest friends.
Oh, that's such a cool Genesis story, and seeing those just characters. I mean, Obi is a character. I'm trying to think of that must have ended up being Free Waco, which it's just been. I hate to say it's probably been 15 years
Mm.
since maybe more. So
Yeah.
I'm fuzzy on remembering it, but there's some iconic scenes of Obi. He's no one, everyone knows that name, and then of course everyone knows Chris. Uh, so was Rampage like kind of one of those big hits? I mean, I named it in the intro because of course, like it's Rampage. It really those other films like Free Wake. I mean, I remember them, but Rampage kind of resonated, man. And yeah, yeah. Take me to what the next big step function was and what you guys were doing after Rampage.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Rampage was a huge deal, and Chris was the man, and that whole thing was basically following him. And Obi's his partner, and brings a lot of the humor and energy. And we were really, like, as I was saying earlier, like the little bouldering scenes that were bubbling up all around. I mean, I started by documenting the one that I was in, which is just in the Northeast. That's pretty limited. And then we did the season in Waco, which again is like that had always been a thing for a long time. But then what we decided to do is let's go on the road trip. Let's go on the ultimate bouldering road trip. And so we went and we visited these spots all over the country and hooked up with the core locals in each spot who were like, in that time, no one was jealously guarding their projects. It was like just thrilling to have anybody be interested in connecting on that level. And in each spot, there'd be two or three people who were like the core developers who were, so excited to show Chris their projects, and he would flash them. And it was like, it was just tapping into a moment when the whole energy around bouldering all around the US was really new, really fresh and exciting, and trying to share that with the world. And that definitely made a big impression. And we have that up on YouTube now. Anyone can watch Rampage. Just search Rampage Chris Sharma, and it's definitely a cultural moment, that I think it's funny watching it now, because there aren't actually any like mega standout sends. There aren't even any really like iconic problems. There's moments, but the moments are more about just like the way things went down, or the energy, or funny things that happened, or Chris doing some crazy weird sequence in the middle of a climb. There wasn't like, the all-time record-breaking mega send. Is more just a vibe. And I think, it just got people excited. I think it got people all over the world excited about bouldering as a pursuit in itself. And I think Chris and Obi, because of their personalities and just the energy that we brought to showing it, I think we just made bouldering look cool, and I think a lot of people like got excited about that. I mean, people in Japan like still have copies on VHS, and it was amazing to see how that rippled around.
I mean, who doesn't want to go on a bouldering trip around the US climbing on really cool stuff? I think he did Eco Terrorist. I think Chris did Eco Terrorist in that, which was a big kind of test piece in the West Coast area, or like the Bay Area. And yeah, when you see guys just having fun cruising around, I mean, I want to say that's what we were doing, but we definitely weren't as handsome, weren't as funny, and we're not climbing as hard. But we had that inkling of what could be. And something that makes me think of is that Chris was already one of the strongest in the world, like early. I mean, because I remember when Chris was 16, and he was 16, but he was the man, despite not just starting to shave, probably.
Yeah.
And you followed him and a lot of other top climbers along, and has climbing become more badass? Like Eco Terrorist is like V10 or V11 or whatever. I don't even know.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's cool. Don't get me wrong, but uh, climbing has grown since then. I'm just kind of curious what was, yeah. Has climbing become more badass, Josh?
In some ways, absolutely. And I mean, I think we've tried to track a lot of those trajectories. I mean, since then, since the 90s, for sure. I mean, so many amazing things have happened, and I think from a filmmaking storytelling perspective, it's important that if we're showing if we're really honing in on something in climbing, it needs to be badass. It needs to be a king line, like we were saying before, or it needs to be a new level, but a new level in a way that's interesting and exciting, you know, not necessarily like someone's lying down a foot off the ground and grabbing a hold that's a millimeter smaller. That's kind of hard to convey beyond the like tiny, tiny niche of people who are like tracking that, you know? So I think, I mean, over the years and all the stories that we've followed, I mean, some of the high end sport climbs that Chris has done and some other people along the way that are just huge and visually spectacular and have crazy moves in them. Yeah, that's gotten much more badass. I mean, Chris on Biography, on Jumbo Love, and even to this day, I mean, Adam doing Silence, we didn't film that, but that's pretty mind blowing and badass. And the film we did with Seb Guan doing DNA a couple years ago. I think that's really badass, you know, and that's what we look for. It's not just about, oh, is the grade like a quarter of a letter higher, but when you look at it, are you like, oh shit, look at that? And that was like with the Seb film, it's like, you know, the climb's obviously super hard. It's like at that top level with Silence probably, and it's visually spectacular. It's on a wall that people hadn't seen much before unless you had been there, and it has wild, surprising moves with the karate kick and just crazy sequences. And at that time, you know, he was a new character that people didn't know much about unless they were super in the core. And then having a fun little side note, like with his mom, who's you watch her flex, and that's pretty badass seeing a 50-something-year-old woman jacked like that. So that just kind of makes it fun on the side. So yeah, I mean, I think there's so many ways it's gotten badass. I mean, Tommy on the Dawn Wall is badass. As Pontas and all the Mallorca stuff that Chris has done is super badass. And the bouldering, I mean, in bouldering, the stuff that, you know, Daniel and Jimmy Webb and Sean Rabitou, I mean, the stuff that they're doing where it's like, you know, obviously they're climbing way, way harder than just a few years ago doing V15, V16, V17, and on big, proud, like sketchy looking spectacular visual lines on king lines. I mean, that's bouldering is way more badass than it used to be.
I got +1 that stuff of Seb out in it's the Ramarol cave, right?
Yeah, that
I'm probably
Ramallah.
pronouncing that
Yeah,
terribly, but I'll never forget that shot coming in. I like literally like I was like, "Mom, look at how cool this looks." And my wife and they're like, we don't care. Josh looks looks okay.
yeah,
And then the other part that stuck out in my head is his mom flexing. There I was just like, wow, I wish I looked like that 52-year-old woman. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, okay. Cool to hear because yeah, every year it seems like you guys get more and more badass shots. And I got to tell you, when you started talking about Mallorca, it's no secret on this show that I love Mallorca. And I remember watching, I think it was Dosage 2. I'm just going to put that out there.
Hmm.
Dosage 2 with Clem Loscott. And yeah, I feel like Mallorca has been a consistent theme across the years for you guys. I just want to hear about how you discovered it, you know, and just is it like was it just as attractive to you as it was to me in the films that you put out that I think I've gone 5 times now, really honestly to chase the things I saw on those films.
Yeah, I mean, it's a special place, and I mean, it's a special form of climbing that I don't think anyone could have even dreamed up in their imagination that something like this could exist. So the first time, it's funny because the first time, it's also connected to Clem Lascott as well as the King Lines lingo. We were in, my brother Brett and I were in Germany filming with Clem, the Blue Ice segment where he's doing some alpine bouldering. And we were shooting him climbing, and Miguel Riera was there. And Miguel is, you know, that we've kind of labeled him the godfather of Seco Block. You know, he's a guy who had grown up in Mallorca, and he had been climbing on the sea cliffs for years and years. He was there with us in Germany on the shoot with Clem, and he was telling Clem you got to come to Mallorca. There's this incredible climbing. It's these limestone caves over the sea. You won't believe it. And Clem was kind of like, okay, okay, yeah, whatever. That sounds cool. Miguel was writing an article for a Spanish magazine at the time. And so he just happened to be overlapping with us on this trip. And we were all hanging out. And he was telling us, no, no, you guys got to make a film. And, he's like, no one ever believes me. And we're like, oh, that sounds interesting, whatever. So soon after the end of that shoot, as soon as I got home, he started sending Clem and us photos from Mallorca. And, the first couple photos were like uh, shots of climbs he had done around Palma, which were like kind of cool. Couldn't quite tell. And then at some point, he sent us a shot of Diablo Wall. And you're sort of like, whoa, it looks like an orange Soyuz over the sea. Like, what is that? And then he started mixing in a few shots of like topless sunbathers, and he's bouldering right above them. And he's quite a character, Miguel. He was a wild party dude, and he was pitching us on that side of it too. So at a certain point, Clem and Tim Emmett from the UK decided to do a trip, and we signed up. We were like, all right, let's go check it out. And Tim had actually done some deepwater soloing in the UK previously, so he had a reference point, and he saw the pictures and was like, oh, that looks, oh my gosh, that could be cool, and it's not going to be freezing water like it is in the UK. So those guys went over there, and my brother and I went over there just for a really short shoot. I think the first time we went was like a week or even less. I think I was only there for like 5 days maybe, and maybe Brett was there for a week or something. We just went to Diablo Wall. Miguel hadn't really done much on that wall because it's just like he kind of given up in it for a few years because nobody was interested in doing it with him. That he couldn't convince people. He'd started in the late 70s and done a lot of stuff, but that wall is kind of like pretty big and intimidating and a lot of hard lines. Maybe he had done a couple lines, but Clem and Tim and Neil Gresham as well, who was there, who was really psyched. Those guys started like developing that wall on that trip, and we just were lucky to be there in that moment. And captured some of those first ascents and a lot of the big falls, and just, I mean, it was mind-blowing because I don't know, there's nothing like that ever occurred to me, to be climbing on super steep, perfect, beautiful limestone, bright orange with pockets, lines all next to each other, some starting at 511, I guess, and obviously going really high. um, and we and then the idea that you could fall into the water, I mean, I gotta say, like, it's really, really scary falling into the water. And some people just can't do it. I mean, you have to be a good swimmer. You have to be comfortable with flying through the air. It's really easy if you land wrong to get hurt. And people get hurt all the time. I'm sure you've seen it, like come up coughing blood, or they get a little Mediterranean enema, or, you just look down and you get smacked in the face and it kind of rings your bell, or you just get water in your ears and it messes up your, like, it's pretty intense. And I feel like you kind of have to be kind of like tough just to handle like falling in the water. You have to be very comfortable being in the water for a long period of time. Sometimes when the waves are big, like people have died there over the years since in big waves and stuff. So it's quite serious, but at the same time, it's not as serious as like actual free soloing. And so it's got this amazing middle ground of like really pushing yourself psychologically, like having to keep your shit together to not get messed up, but having that safety cushion of being able to be above the water, go for it, take falls and survive. And you can kind of, decide, depending on which cliff you go to, which route you try, how hard you want to push it, you can kind of like find your comfort zone. And I wasn't like that comfortable with it. I couldn't really like make myself go for it that much. Right off the plane, the guys like basically made me do a climb, and I don't even remember which one it was, but it was like one of the 511s that has the crux right at the top, and I was terrified, and I was like, screaming on the last move and like throwing a heel hook, and everyone's like, "Oh God!" And I made it, thankfully, and then like didn't really climb much the rest of the time, just filmed. But it was mind blowing, and we captured the clam doing the first ascent of the big dyno, Lascott and Two Smoking Barrels. He uh, he 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 wanted to name it, after the film Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. The Two Smoking Barrels are the two big holes next to each other because that film had just come out. It was super hot, and I was like, dude, he didn't even recognize the pun at first, and I was like, we're not naming it Lock, Stock. We're definitely naming it Lock, Scott. And he was like, no, I don't want to sound conceited. I was like, I don't care. I'm putting that on the video. So I had to override him on the name, and I think it's stood the test of time. But basically, when we saw him doing that dyno, just the thrill of it, the freedom, the beauty, the combination of the sea and the walls. One of the first things that Brett and I thought was like, holy shit, Sharma is gonna love this. Like, we have to, he is gonna flip his shit. And that is exactly what happened. I mean, it changed his life. We went back with him a few months later, and he was just immediately like, oh my god, this is it, this is the ultimate thing for me. And here we are more than 20 years later, and he's still out there now working on new projects, and it's really like steered the course of his life, like one of the reasons he ended up moving to Spain and stuff like that. So that was definitely another inflection point.
I'm glad that you helped name Lost Scott and Two Smoking Barrels. Very good name. I've traveled a decent amount. I would argue that that may be the coolest climb in the world. It's reasonable to say. I can't believe that these things actually exist, where there's a little area to hang out, and then you climb basically just right up the gut of a say use of orange over the water in the Mediterranean, cheered on by half naked women as well, and then
And
summit
men,
to.
naked men
And,
too.
it's true. It's true.
Miguel was always naked, and so that balanced things out.
By the way, they must have put you on, I think it's called Lobster Claw. It's like a mid 5'11. And I've seen so many people pitch off the top because you think that it's going to be, it's like, oh, okay, I can climb 5'11.
Yeah.
And then the crux is at the top. And also, these things are not well trafficked. I guess it's kind of changed. It must have been, you guys must have just been out there living the life by yourself. And when I first went, it was a little less crowded. And I don't blame Miguel for not spending too much time there when it's called Diablo Wall, because it's wild out there. I would not encourage anyone to do that by themselves.
Yeah,
It's
no,
it's
you gotta,
dangerous.
and now, you gotta kind of have a plan. Now that people usually have ropes going into the water, most people bring like a life ring or something to be floating nearby in case, because it's pretty easy for something to go wrong. And I know that from personal experience as well.
Yeah, go on. I've heard this story before, but I want to hear you tell it.
Yeah, so we showed the footage of that dyno to Chris before we put out the film, and he was just like, "Oh my God, I need to go there." So we planned a second trip. We went back not too long after. Brought Chris. Clem came back to meet us again, and so those two guys climbing together was our second visit. Um, the 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 whole time I had been there on my first trip, it's a whole thing to jump off the Diablo cliff, and most people who are comfortable climbing there, it's like you feel like you need to get comfortable jumping off it at some point. It's kind of like a rite of passage, just to know that you are capable of falling from that high if you have to. I don't know. Have you ever jumped it?
No, dude, that's a bad call.
Most people
Yeah.
jump it. Most people jump it at some point. I that Clem jumped it, Miguel jumped it. Our first time there, Brett jumped it. Miguel even kind of like pushed him a little bit, so he had to jump it. I never did. I was always like, I don't know. I just got here, like I'm jet lagged. I could never make myself do it. And so when we went back with Chris, we got there day one. We went to the hotel. We're drinking a couple glasses of wine in the hotel at night, and Chris is like, dude, let's go look at the cliff. And I'm like, yeah, let's go jump it. So we drive out to the cliff. It's just a couple minutes away. Chris is so excited. He just wants to see it. And I'm like, all right, I was trying to get psyched the whole time last time to jump it. I never did it. Let's jump this shit. Chris is like, yeah, woohoo. So, and Clem is like, bad idea, guys. Don't do that. This is really bad. Don't jump it. And Chris is like, no, it's fine. It's 60 feet, right? Like, that's fine. I do that all the time. Like, water's deep, right? He's like, as long as the water's deep, I'm not worried. And I'm like, yeah, I think it's probably fine. Getting a little trepidatious. And all of a sudden, Chris just runs and hucks it. He's just like, no hesitation, full speed run, just hucks it in the dark, never having been there before. And I just hear him splash, like, woohoo! And I'm like, oh God, now I have to do it too. So I did. And I was in the air and it was dark and I'm looking down. And when you're falling, you have to make sure you stay upright. And so you're doing this in the air just by instinct to keep yourself upright, which is really important. But it's super important right before you hit to tuck your arms and pencil in. And I was looking down, but because it was dark, I couldn't quite tell when I was going to hit. Like I couldn't, my depth perception wasn't there to tuck it. So I didn't tuck my arms. I hit with my arms out, which is like basically the worst thing you can do. And my left arm ripped out of the socket. I was floating in the water, and Chris was like, "Woohoo, you good, dude?" And I was like, "No, I'm not." And I put my hand here, and I could tell that my shoulder wasn't there. My shoulder was like down here. My arm was like a few inches below where it should have been. And I was like, "Oh shit, man! I think I dislocated my shoulder." He's like, "Oh no." So I had never done that before, and I heard later that like 90% of people who dislocate, especially for the first time, like have to go to the emergency room to get it put back in because it's just so weird. But my other brother had dislocated his shoulder many times. I've actually watched him like bash it back in. So just by instinct, somehow treading water, I grabbed my wrist and I just like yanked it really hard, and it went back in. Um,
Okay.
and I was just kind of so buzzing with adrenaline and survival mode. I was, I could sort of still use my hand, like a little bit to tread water and swim a little bit. And I was like, oh man. So you either have to like climb out, which is I think it's like 5'7" or something to get out, right?
Harder than that, dude. More like 5'10" or something. It's
Yeah,
got a move on there.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, the hard part is that there's a rope hanging down. The first few moves are just hand over handing up a rope to get onto the ledge, or you can swim like a half a mile around a corner to this little beach or something. Which I was like, you know what? I'm probably better off just trying to climb out. At the very least, I've got the best climber in the world right next to me. I'll just fucking jump on his back, and if there's one person who could literally climb me out of here, it's Chris. So I was able to like just sort of like keep my messed up arm closed and reach up high, kind of haul myself out. Chris is like literally right next to me the whole time, which was awesome. And I got like halfway up, and there's this cave, and these pigeons flew out right in my face. I was like, ah, barely held on and was able to get out. That was day one of our 2-week trip, and so I was completely incapacitated the rest of the trip. I mean, I was just there to film, so that's fine anyway. I've never really been able to do a lot of climbing when I'm filming anyway. But we made our second piece that's also in that dosage too, with Clem and with Chris getting in the groove. And Chris, I mean, he just ate that up. He flashed Clem's dyno, just hiked it, and the two of them put up all these other super hard things, and he just fell in love. And yeah, I didn't have health insurance, so I waited a while before I did anything about it. Bought some health insurance, tried to do PT for a while, but ended up needing to get a surgery. And I had my whole shoulder was rebuilt, the labrum and the biceps tendon, like everything, like fully reattached, and it ended up working out. I mean, basically, I lost a year of climbing to it, and it's kind of stupid. And now, there's just like mental note, like don't follow Chris. There's certain things you're like, don't follow Chris if he's like doing some crazy shit. Don't follow Alex Honnold. Like if he's like, no, it's fine, dude, come on, do it. It's like, nope, just don't do it. It's not gonna go well for you. And I kept that lesson with me since. I've been a little bit less stupid ever since then.
Yeah, dude, you were like, haven't you jumped off the top? Like, didn't you do it? I was like, no, I've come close to falling near the top because some of those lines, but I don't want to fall off there. I don't really want to jump off there. And this is the weird thing about that place is it's really binary where you jump off and it goes fine. You're like, oh, this is no big deal. Like,
Yeah.
but then when it is a big deal, it's a really big deal. I gotta tell you, because I've dislocated my shoulder climbing, but not in Mallorca. I actually like did a prep with my PT. Like, what happens if I dislocate in the water? Like, how do I
Oh,
get it back in? Like, what do I do? Because it just freaked me out. And also to that first glimpse of the Diablo wall when I first went there, and we kind of warmed up for a day on some of the easier, lower stuff. We go to Diablo wall that night. I'm staying with a buddy, and it was so serious and so shocking to us how scary it looked. and he said was actually a hemophiliac, and I didn't know that. And this is the time that he decided to tell me. He's like, "Dude, I just want you to know if something goes wrong, I'm a hemophiliac. This is my kit." And just like it's so serious when you look at that wall, and I mean, just again, it's that badass, that feeling in your chest, in your heart, in your guts that you're like, "Oh, whoa, okay." And so you guys are still going out there. Chris is still going. I saw Chris in September, not long ago, and yeah, uh, you guys have kept going back. What are some big memories from over the years that that kicked it off? But you guys, 20 years. I don't know how long it's been, but you guys keep going back.
Yeah, well, I mean, the next big moment was Chris projecting Pontas, the Arch. That was definitely another inflection point. I mean, that to me, that's always been just in terms of pure hard movement and aesthetics, visuals for rock climbing. It was kind of the pinnacle of a fantasy of what a climb could be for movement, visuals, um, badassness, you know. And he spent a long, long time working on that. Brett, my brother, spent weeks and weeks with him there over the course of whatever it was, a year and a half or so, as Chris was working on it, filming it. And when he finally did it, you know, we were always hoping that that would be the finale for the King Lines film, and it was. And I think that's an iconic moment in the history of rock climbing, and something that at the time when we captured it, and I had the feeling of like, cool, we did it. Like like in terms of pure difficulty and visuals, I don't know that we can do better than that. Like some climbs are gonna be much bigger, some things are gonna have deeper stories, whatever, but in terms of just like pure badass rock climbing, starting from a bouldering slash sport climbing perspective, I don't think it can possibly get any cooler. You know, the dyno, the falls, the waves, the arch, Chris's epic journey on it, like it's just magnificent. You know, so that was huge, and that was a time when Chris connected really deeply with Miguel in Mallorca. Those two became as close as brothers, and we spent a lot of time with Miguel. He's the one who showed that climb to Chris, and he was an important character in the King Lines movie. Miguel passed away a few years ago from lung cancer, and that was a sad moment for us all. And try to remember to send respects to him whenever we talk about Mallorca, because he really created this whole thing, and he was an incredibly generous person in sharing it with us and sharing it with Chris and sharing it with even regular people from all over the world who came to climb there. He would go party with them and show them climbs and just share his passion for it. So that was an amazing time to share with him. And I mean, a lot of people don't know there's a whole level to Chris's motivation in climbing Espontas that he's written about, or he's been interviewed about a little bit. But a lot of people don't realize that climb was really meaningful for him in a lot of different ways. He was doing it and working on it during a time after he had just lost his mother, and she died by suicide, jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. And it was a horrible time for him. Brett and I kind of went through that with him at the time, and likewise, Brett and I lost our mother in '99, right before we went on the Rampage trip. So during that Rampage trip, there was a lot of emotions happening behind the scene around that, and we went through that with Chris, and that was like part of our early bonding with him. So for Chris, being on this climb and devoting himself to it was a kind of therapy. And even the visual symbolism of Espontas, which means the bridge, and the orange color and the shape of it, and him putting all this passion into this thing that had a really deeper symbolism for him. I mean, we at the time we weren't ready to go to that level, and he wasn't ready to go to that level in terms of integrating that into the story of King Lines. But it's something that really gave that climb an extra level of meaning for him and for us. That's pretty resonates still to this day, for people who know about it. So that was a
Yeah,
huge time.
that's heavy. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. rest in peace to, gosh, a lot of people listening are often young and they boulder and they just like climbing. But if you
Yeah.
keep making it to getting older and older, you lose people in the world. And, that's how sometimes the pursuits that we do can take another dimension where it can be a small escape plus perhaps a homage to something that you can't touch directly.
No question. That's
Yeah.
life, like we all love climbing, but it's our way to express ourselves in whatever form we interact with it. And as you get older, yeah, like life gets complicated and things have more meaning than what they seem like on the surface sometimes. And that's beautiful, that's humanity, and that's creativity and love.
Gosh, I just can't believe that it all comes together with the bridge and the color and I mean that's a amazing behind the scenes. I had maybe heard something along those lines, but I didn't understand the total connection. And I it it also just makes me wonder. So you are there taking part and witnessing some of these amazing stories, but even though you're a storyteller, you don't get to write the stories. In some ways, you have to just be there. And what happens if the story doesn't complete itself? Like, what if someone doesn't send? Like, how do you deal with? Yeah, I mean, it's not just your choice. How it's not a Hollywood behind the scenes script that like, and then it came full circle and everything was perfect. So, how do you deal with those moments?
Yeah, I mean, every project is different, and I mean, so far we've been talking about kind of the relatively early films where, especially at the very beginning, it wasn't so much story. I mean, I was trying to put a little bit of fabric together to hold things together, but really I was focused on action and just conveying the passion for the pursuit. Even with King Lines, there's a story. You're following Chris on his journey. You're learning about him, but we didn't go all the way with the depth and the humanity of it. So, but I mean, nowadays, as we've matured as filmmakers and as the audience has grown, and as we've just tried to keep expanding our horizons as storytellers, those stories have gotten often more complex and deeper and more emotional and more about human journeys and the deeper meanings of climbing beyond just grabbing a small hold. So over time, it's evolved. Um, and I mean, if you just talk about it on the some relatively straightforward level of like someone trying a hard climb, yeah, you can't schedule that, you can't script that. Definitely in the early years, a lot of what we did was just following the best climbers and just being there until they hopefully send. And if they don't, then you make a decision whether you put something out that shows the process or something they're trying or focus on something else, or you wait until maybe it's ripe. Um, and we've done both over the years, just depending on what the project is and the timeline and everything else. A lot of times nowadays, now like we're running a business, we have the tour, it has a schedule. We have to be a little more ahead of the curve in terms of planning out lineups, and efficient in terms of shooting things. Like it's less these days about just like hanging out for months and hoping to capture the send. Sometimes it'll be like an athlete lets you know that they just sent something and their buddy got some footage. Do you want to tell that story? That's a way that a production can get started. um, Sometimes the story, nowadays especially, a lot of times the story isn't about a send. The story is about a person. We have a lot of films now that are more character profiles, like Barefoot Charles. We did the film with him, which I love and I had a great time making, and I think is super unique and interesting. And he literally doesn't send anything the entire film. And that, in that case, I knew that was a possibility going into it. And it's almost better that way, just because it's such a part of his character that he's not interested in just checking something off of his list. He's exploring his own unique vision and the outer limits of what he theoretically could do. And so to capture a bit of that process, I think was pretty cool. Um, And yeah, I mean, a lot of the film, or a film, a film that's much more like human focused. It's climbing centric, but it's not about ascent at all. Like resistance climbing, about Palestinian climbers in the West Bank. Like it's about climbing, but it's about a much broader meaning of climbing than anybody sending. Like it really doesn't matter who sends what. So a lot of our films are, some of our films are in that kind of genre these days, and that's something you can really, talk to the characters, think through, uh, develop a story, mostly in post production when you're editing, and you're not sitting around waiting for someone to break a world record or something, because that's a tough game to play over and over.
It does seem like it's almost part of being a professional is kind of delivering, like knowing what you can bite off. I don't know. I just sometimes you see these two climbers can be this have the same ability, and then they go out on a trip, and maybe this isn't for for a film, but there's some people who just when it comes down to the wire they end up executing and some people don't. And so I don't know, it just I don't want you to ever name any names of people who aren't like that, but it does seem like that's kind of part of the game too. If you want to be a superstar, is getting it done.
Yeah, I wouldn't name names of people who aren't like that, but there are definitely a handful of people who you never want to bet against. You know what I mean? Um, like if they're excited about something and they're feeling it, like you don't want to go like, I don't know, we'll just wait until you send it or something like that. And then you learn who those people are, and those are the people who are in films a lot because they're real professionals, and of course they don't know when they're going to send it. I mean, Tommy Caldwell on the Dawn Wall, like I made up my mind early, never bet against Tommy, and it took years and years before he did the Dawn Wall, and we were there for a bunch of those seasons documenting the whole thing, and it was fascinating. And in the end, it was true, like the fact that he actually did it was kind of mind blowing, and the fact that we had actually like gone with him for a big part of that ride is what gave us the material to really tell that story on a grand scale.
Dude, I was in Margalef and kind of was climbing a bit with with KJ, and he was like, "Yeah," and I was telling him, "Kevin, I think you would love Mallorca. I think this is a style you would just enjoy. It'd be so fun." He was like, "Well, what's the season?" I was like, "Oh, like October." He's like, "Oh, I'm working on this project with Tommy," and I was like, "What are you doing, swinging around up there on ropes? You guys, this has been going on for years. It's not going to happen. You need to come out. Mallorca is fun. You're going to love it." And having that commitment is important. So, uh, when did the switch happen to this more storytelling? And is this you getting older? Like King Lions, I want to say mid 2000s, late 2000s, something like that.
2006, 2007, just depending on how you count it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was that kind of like the last of the let's see
Mhm.
badass climbers doing badass things and just film it in this, raw way. I don't want to say it's raw way. I'm putting words in your mouth. But when did stories start to be more crucial to the work that you put out?
Yeah. So I mean, first of all, I think we are still making some films that are like, check out this badass climb, like DNA is an example. That stuff's still in the mix. Um,
Cool.
but the ideal situation is badass climbing and a really interesting human story that translates beyond the niche of people who keep track of every single hold on every hardest climb. I love those people. I'm one of them, but like it's limited where you can go with that. So I think for me personally, teaming up with Pete Mortimer, who's my partner in running Real Rock, um, definitely was kind of another inflection point in terms of, first of all, just coming up with the concept of Real Rock and creating the tour. And then, yeah, just having sort of coming at climbing films from a little bit different emphasis perspective. Um, I was definitely starting out coming from a very like core action oriented um, approach to documenting climbing, like really into trying to make beautiful, perfect, clean visuals and showing the cutting edge shit and trying to put it together in a kind of styly, striking, cool way. You know, that was kind of the very beginning of my thoughts, and then exploring storytelling in my own kind of way, but um, not necessarily going super deep on that. Like starting with the action and then weaving in the story in a way to hold it together in a way, I guess. Pete started making his own climbing films a couple years after I started, and he was kind of coming at it. First of all, he's more into trad climbing and adventure climbing than I was, so he was focusing more on like sketchy stuff or big dangerous stuff like that. And also just by personality and inclination, really interested in like zany characters and humor and trying to go deeper with personal stories. At some point he made a comment like, I want to make films that my mom loves or that people's moms love. They're still climbing films, but like I want them to translate beyond the core. And so I was kind of doing my films, he was doing his. We were buddies and we would talk, and we actually helped each other out with each other's films. He edited on some of my early stuff. I gave him notes and did some shooting. We helped each other. We're kind of on parallel tracks. And he ended up going to film school. He did a production program at USC, which is like one of the top film programs, focused on the business side of it for a couple of years. And when he was finished with that, we kind of reconnected and talked in a more concrete way about, all right, we've been doing this for a few years. It's clearly got some potential. Like, how can we, is there a way we can, first of all, just make bigger films? And second of all, like turn this into a sustainable business. And so we came up with the Real Rock model. Basically, I had done a couple of screening tours on my own. I think the first kind of bigger one I did was the Pilgrimage tour. I made the Pilgrimage movie with Sharma and Nate Gold and Katie Brown, where we went to India, bouldering in Hampi. I was trying a little harder there to make a deeper story, and looking back, it's pretty corny, but there's some fun things about it. But I organized this whole tour. I was like finishing the edit of the film while like single-handedly organizing a whole screening tour. And then we went and we drove like around the country. It's kind of this barnstorming tour showing the movie in all these theaters. And it was great. Like people came to the shows, like we had amazing, poster signings and bands opening, and had this cool thing. But I was like, oh my God, like I can't do this by myself while I'm making the movie. And Pete kind of dabbled in the same thing on his side, and we said, all right, let's combine forces. Let's create an actual tour model. Let's hire someone to run the tour. Let's start collaborating on film projects here and there, or see what makes sense. So The King Lines was the first film that he and I like started with a concept from the beginning and co-directed from the beginning, and really thought about it as a movie as opposed to a climbing video, I would say. And that was the first Real Rock tour we did, was the year before that, and it featured excerpts from the film he was making and excerpts from the film I was making. It was like shorts from one of the dosages and from his film First Ascent. Funny enough, the segment that was featured from his side on the very first Real Rock tour was featuring Didier Berthaud trying the Cobra crack. And so now, 19 years later, we've come full circle and we're featuring him again, actually coming back to the Cobra crack. So that's kind of fun for us to reflect back on. But the second Real Rock tour was King Lines, the whole feature film on the tour. And then from there, we started really, planning out our films for the tour and collaborating more and more. And at some point made the whole business partnership official. And now basically we're partners on everything we do between Real Rock, Big Up, and Sender. And our other partner, Nick Rosen, is super involved on the creative on a lot of the films. And he's comes from a journalistic background, and he's a real storyteller too, and brings a lot to the table in terms of the deeper human level and the scripting and the more complex storytelling, and wanting to broaden the films out quite far. So, and we've got a team. I think we have about 10 or 12 full-time employees now. Most of the team is in Boulder. A few of us are over here on the East Coast. And we're doing the tour films year after year. We do some commercial projects here and there with a few key clients, and we do more crossover mainstream documentaries as well, like The Alpinist and the Dawn Wall, and we're working on some really cool projects right now, like some multi-episode series for HBO and Hulu, and yeah, trying to keep all the balls in the air. But it all started from the climbing stuff, and it's still all in that lane, you know.
Dude, I didn't totally realize you're part of the Alpinist too, which is an incredible movie.
Yeah, thanks.
So Real Rock 19 is what just came out. So that means 19 years, right? Is that you guys have
19
been it for
years.
19 years? I
Yeah.
Before we go into that, because it's amazing that that you had well, Didier did not send. So it was an example of him not sending, yet that was still amazing in the beginning, and that full circle. All right, I'm just gonna leave that hanging. Uh what made you guys decide to do tours? And they became such an iconic thing in climbing, such a yearly event. Literally, honestly, man, like the only thing we would go and do that had anything to do with climbing as a group. It was like an excuse to buy the tickets at your gym, all go and as a group. Uh, and I know that I want to say that the last one you did for Real Rock 19 in Boulder had maybe thousands of people, or a couple thousand or something, which is that's a lot. Tell me about why you guys chose that model, and did you recognize it was going to be the Schelling point that was so important for climbing?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I experimented with doing some small scale tours of my own little films, and just right from the beginning, it was clear that people were excited. You know, people wanted to see the movies. I mean, the original business model was literally selling VHS tapes. You know, so it's like I would like check some website every day. I mean, there were barely websites, but I would be like, get an order for a VHS tape, and I would have someone put it in an envelope and mail it for $20, you know? And that was clearly like not going to scale that well. So, you know, I mean, my very first experience making Big Up was like screening it at a party for like 40 friends who were climbing in the gunks, and having people watch and, you know, drinking and cheering and pausing it and making fun of each other and yelling at the screen and talking about it afterwards for hours, you know. And that's just a really impactful experience as a creator. There's nothing better than seeing a room full of people enjoy what you made. And the bigger the room, you know, like for us, if we can get a laugh, like if you're in an audience and you hear 500, 1,000, 2,000 people like laughing uproariously because of something you made, I mean, that's gold, you know. Or cheering for someone who finally did something, or gasping because they can't believe what they just saw, or tearing up and sniffling because the story you're telling is really affecting them. Like that is like the ultimate reward as a creator, as a storyteller. I mean, you could like with you know, we can put something on YouTube right now, and that's great, and we do, but like I don't know what someone's experiencing behind their screen on the other side of the world, and I don't get to feel that energy. So, you know, doing live screenings is amazing. It's kind of every filmmaker's dream to be able to have that work, and we experimented a little bit, and it just took off, you know. um, Sometimes early on we'd have, you know, musicians playing before the show, and then you have the poster signings, and then you have the sponsors there in person demonstrating stuff. It builds it into a whole thing. And to have an annual cycle where people know to look forward to it, and the sponsors know that they'll have this moment to engage, and we know that it's all building to this really special moment of the premiere and the tour, like kind of keeps us on track, as opposed to just like, you know, the first few years I just kind of finished my films when I could, and, you know, sell them on VHS. But having a cycle like that is really good. And yeah, I mean, we have, you know, we had our this year we had 2,000 people at the premiere
Wow.
in Mackey Auditorium in Boulder. um, and you know, the tour model, it's great. It took a huge hit in the pandemic, obviously. That shook everything up and just froze that whole thing. I mean, we couldn't shoot, let alone fill theaters with people. So that was a big bump in the road for our whole business and our whole model, and made us think a lot more seriously about the digital side of it to balance things out. But I mean, the premieres are still the most fun and exciting for us as creators.
Yeah, please keep it up. I know it's 19 years on, but it's still really important. Uh, Josh, you have been climbing forever. You were in the scene earlier. You were around all these other people, and a lot of people picked up cameras or wrote articles. A lot of people were kind of there when it started. It was a small group, and people have done some cool things, but not everyone went on to build, whether it's an iconic hold company or a gym chain or the media business. And just, do you have any insight into why, even though you were there and even though you picked up a camera, other people did too, but you really took it to a professional level that stands out? What how'd you do it, man?
Mm. Um, Being willing to stick with it for quite a while when it didn't seem like, I mean, the first 2 or 3 years, I never envisioned it as, I couldn't even really imagine that it could be like a big business and a huge career, or that, the Dawn Wall would be on Netflix and stuff like that. That never even really occurred to me. So it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I have this vision for my 20-year plan, and I'm gonna bullet point it out and take every step. It's really following the passion. Sometimes passions wax and wane. Mine kind of hasn't. So really just doing it, like following your vision without questioning it. And that doesn't mean I never questioned it. I had lots of times I questioned it where I just was like, I can't finish this. I just need to stop. Or why am I bothering making these silly little things that only a few thousand people care about? Like, when am I going to have a real career? I went through all of that. And so, being willing to kind of roll with it and stick with it. I mean, I think another piece that sometimes people overlook, especially like creative people who are into artistic pursuits, sometimes overlook the importance of uh, teamwork. I mean, I definitely couldn't have been doing anything close to what I'm doing now if I hadn't teamed up with Peter back in the day, and then Nick, and brought in key people. My brother Brett, like being out there, he's the guy who's usually like on the rope next to the best in the world week after week after week, and just become the best high angle shooter there is. You know, like I think a lot of creative people are caught in their ego a little bit of like, this is how I want to do it, or I have this vision, or like I need my name to be at the top, and that's an easy trap to fall into that really holds you back. And from the beginning, it's not necessarily that easy to sit on a call with 3 or 4 people who all strongly disagree about the direction of a project. I mean, we like still to this day we do an insane amount of, in our edits, in our post-production process, like insane amount of discussing, often disagreeing the creative direction, and down to the details of who says what in the edit. And we don't always come from the same perspective on where the emphasis should be. And sometimes that's really hard as a creative person, to swallow the ego, to compromise, to like not have it be about your name and your creation. And that's something we've all learned to do together, and has definitely made it possible to like keep this sustainable. Because as one person, you got to be a freak to keep up the motivation year after year after year, to have someone else that you're responsible to, that you answer to have someone who doesn't usually agree with you, who, even though it's tough to have that conversation, kind of like keeps you back in line from going with your weirdest impulses way off on some silly limb. It's really helpful. And I think a lot of people get stuck on that. I see that a lot. Like, even with, we often collaborate with other filmmakers, young people coming up, who are shooting stuff or editing stuff. And I would say for those people, that's a huge lesson. Like, a lot of people are not willing to compromise. A lot of people don't want to hear notes. A lot of people don't want input on their baby that they've spent months and months laboring over and thinking about everything. And sometimes we'll come in and give people notes, and they'll be like, fuck you guys, like, that's not my vision. And we're like, okay, we hear you, like, do your vision. But taking criticism and compromising on things often is a really good way to arrive at the best product. And also, having a team is kind of the, to me, it's one of the only ways you can really build something.
Some kind of analogy there for climbing and being open-minded to your friends telling you new beta. Uh, okay, so I know it takes a team, but I also know you have edited, filmed a lot over the years, and I was just hoping to pick your brain, a little bit of wisdom for those aspiring to do the same. And we when I posed this to you earlier today, like, hey, could you do like a 101 on editing or filming for climbing? You said maybe a 201. So, yeah, what's the 201 class or short notes on someone who wants to follow in your footsteps?
I mean, I don't know about footsteps. I think there's a lot of different paths these days, and it's as far as the actual filming. I mean, everyone has a camera in their pocket at all times. Everyone films themselves and their friends on every single go now, and so it's pretty freaking easy to get like pretty decent footage. So I don't even really think I need to say much about shooting. Like a lot of people are shooting nice footage, you know. Um, I think I think on the edit, the number one thing I would say that I see over and over and over again in people's videos that they post or people's rough cuts that they share with us for notes or that we collaborate with, make it half as long. Make it less than half as long. Like whatever you're trying to show, like I probably don't need to watch it for 40 minutes. I probably maybe could watch it for like 18 minutes. And that's really hard when you're the shooter and you're the editor. You have an inclination because you know what it took to get those shots. You have an inclination to put every single shot in there and just think you have to get, in the process of editing the footage, you fall in love with it all. You have to, otherwise you'd never put in the hours that it takes to get through it. And you see these tiny little subtle things that you think are so amazing. But in the context of someone scrolling through YouTube and being like, oh, cool, a new V16, let me watch it. Or like, oh, somebody talking about some interesting story. Just make it much, much, much shorter. Pretty much like every single time someone submits something to us for consideration to like go on our platform or to collaborate with us, almost every single time we're like, cool, that'd be good if it was less than half as long. And I think the corollary to that goes well with what I was just speaking about the team is like, don't just go all the way in your process alone in your head. Share it with people early in the process. Like get people who you trust, who are critical to give you input fairly early. Like, dude, that part's really boring. Like I don't like he already said that 5 times. I don't need to hear him say it again. Or before you're locked in, because once you're locked in, it's hard not to be precious about the amount of time you took to get it there. And if someone's like, cut half of it, you're like, fuck you, man, I spent months on this, I'm not cutting it. So early on, when you have a rough cut, start sharing it and just get people's like gut reaction, like, oh, that's really cool, but I don't need to see it, I don't need to see him try it 20 times. How about you just show me like 2 or 3? um I think that's a real important uh lesson that people should take, and we do that internally. We're harsh with each other internally in that, like, we start showing rough cuts and it's like, nope, 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 cut, 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 I don't need to hear this again, all that stuff.
Well, it's brutal because what that requires is for you to really know what you're trying to show, like really
Yeah.
deep down to just like if there was one thing that you could communicate, because that's really maybe all you have time for. And so, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's different depending on the medium. I mean, we're always looking at it through the lens, starting with a tour film. And in a tour, you're talking about you have an audience who bought a ticket and they're sitting in a seat watching a screen for a certain amount of time. And if you have 2 or 3 or 4 films, you can't have those people sitting there for 5 hours, and even beyond that, like you want people to be fresh and be excited for the next thing and not like glaze over. So we have a really strong onus on tightness in our internal cuts from that point of view. And then even on Real Rock Unlimited and for other things, or for a Red Bull episode, it's like, that's just kind of our MO, is to try and keep things moving and tight. Now, if you're just doing, I mean, the other extreme is a podcast, for instance, right? Like you're not like, you assume that people who are chiming in are like psyched to just listen for a while. And you're not going to slice out every time I say like or but we do that. Like we take out every time someone says like or not every, but we scrunch stuff down aggressively. So it depends on the medium. And, on YouTube, maybe it's somewhere in between. People might want to see like every single problem someone did on their recent trip or something like that. But I think in terms of people, keeping people engaged in an actual story and having that go beyond just like the core group of people who are like really obsessed, shorter is better. Shorter is a lot better. And yeah, you better know what you're trying to say, to your point. Like if you don't know what you're trying to say, if you don't know what the main point is, then maybe you don't have a film.
Josh, I'm glad that you tore down the fourth wall. I was literally going to say, should I just click stop now? Like, was our chat concise enough? But it is the medium and understanding where you are. And we've been talking about Real Rock as a tour, but I also got to point out that I just went online and started watching Real Rock 19 in like 30 seconds because it's now online. You can just get all the films we've been talking about. Like if you're listening, you could watch right now. You could go on to it right now, which is, I love the in-person component. It's cool to hear that you get rewarded by the feedback from the audience because yeah, having a room full of people erupt in laughter or gasp or have, feel those emotions must be nice than just seeing a number on YouTube go up. So let's talk more about Real Rock 19 because it just came out. What were the 3 films you guys put out this year in Real Rock?
Yeah, so Real Rock 19 is our 19th year of doing it. We ran the tour. The tour launched like 2 months ago, and the tour has been going all around the world. And there's still some tour shows happening, especially in other countries, even though we've just done the digital launch on our platform, Real Rock Unlimited. And yeah, we're really proud of these films. There's 3 films. I think it's one of our best lineups we've ever had. I mean, the comments we've been getting from people who have gone to tour screenings have been incredibly touching and rewarding and validating just after the amount of effort that it takes to make these films and all the different conversations that have come up around them. So it's been incredible to hear from people, including some like, top climbers that have been in the game for dozens of years who are like surprised by how deeply moved and touched they were by some of these stories. So we're proud of these films, and I hope everyone will go check them out on Real Rock Unlimited. You can rent them for $20. You can buy them permanently for I think 35. And then we also have subscribers to the Real Rock Unlimited platform. So if you're a subscriber, you just can watch them for free now and watch basically everything we've ever made. So that's a pretty good deal too. But we haven't always done the $20 rental on release. That's kind of a new thing, and we just thought it was really important to make it, relatively accessible to people to watch these films without necessarily having to make a huge commitment. So
I do like the rental style too. I mean, that sounds like a antiquated, like blockbuster thing, but I got to tell you, although in the early days I've watched Dosage to the sequel block like a million times, but I don't always watch films multiple times. So I appreciate that for getting to sit around as a family and just pop it on, which I encourage everyone to do. And I did like the lineup. I gotta tell you, the Cobra and the Heart actually brought a tear to my eye. I think that happened as you get older. Maybe it's as you get older. I have a daughter. There's kids are part of it, and that one was beautiful. And you kind of gave a little foreshadowing when you said that in the first Real Rock, you were filming Didier trying Cobra crack, and just set up that intro a little bit more, and then tell me a little bit more about the film that came out this year.
yeah, so the Cobra and the Heart is a film that means a lot to me. I mean, I directed it and edited it and spent a lot of time working with Didier Berthaud and Thomasina Pigeon and Cedar Pigeon, telling the story. And it's a saga. It's an epic. I mean, it's over an hour long. It could easily be a standalone feature doc on its own, or even more. I mean, it's a wild story, and we couldn't even fit every single chapter into this iteration of it. So, but the story is very emotional, surprising, far-ranging. Basically, we follow Didier's journey over the course of 20 years. He's someone who burst on the scene in like 2004, 2005. A Swiss climber. He was young at the time, 24, 25. And he came to the US and he did all these mind-blowing first ascents of some of the hardest cracks around. And at the time, it was really unusual to have a European high-end crack climber because, all the Europeans were sport climbing back then. Most of their cracks have been bolted. And Americans were very proud of their legacy of being the burly, macho, trad, tough ass crack climbers out in the desert drinking and, being rowdy and stuff like that. So Didier popped into the scene, and my partner Pete filmed him climbing some of these incredible cracks in Moab back then, and followed him back to Switzerland, where he made the first ascent of this climb called Green Spit, which was the first, maybe like one of the first 514 cracks, I believe, and certainly the hardest crack in Europe at the time. And then Didier's next mission was trying to do the Cobra crack in Squamish. And at that time, it hadn't been climbed yet. It was this sort of like legendary theoretical project that people had talked about for years, splitter, overhanging, thin crack. Didier started trying it, figured it out, spent months and months trying to climb it. Pete was up there filming the whole thing, trying to capture the first ascent. In the end, he failed on the climb, and he kind of had this epic, complete psychological breakdown. That's and Pete put out his film called First Ascent, and the Didier chapter of the film showing his journey on the Cobra ended up being the highlight of that film and the end of the film. And so you see Didier failing on the climb. You get a hint in that footage that like things were going on beneath the surface, but you don't really know what. And the movie ends with Didier basically humiliated, having failed on the climb. Sonny Trotter comes along and does the first ascent, which was cool because you actually get to see someone climb it, and it was this amazing accomplishment by Sonny. But you've fallen in love with Didier after following him, and you see him just crushed. And the last couple shots are him like limping away on crutches, basically never to be seen again. And the last frame of the film is a title that says, Didier is now recovering from knee surgery in a monastery in Switzerland, which is like, what? Like, it's like the ultimate ... And that was it. Didier disappeared, and basically no one heard from him for the next 13 years. Um, Now, our story kind of, starts with the recap of that, and it follows what happened with him over the next 20 years, but also with the other key people in the story, who are Thomasina, who was his girlfriend at the time, who was not a part of that movie, and Cedar, who is the daughter that Thomasina had. And so the whole thing really picks up with telling the behind the scenes story from Thomasina's perspective of what was going on during Didier's attempts to climb the Cobra. It's an incredible love story, the two of them falling in love, going through these wild, passionate ups and downs together, her becoming pregnant, um, and the two of them trying to figure out how to make it work together, basically failing in those efforts. Didier having the Cobra all wrapped up in this dramatic personal journey, and his knee blowing out, and his very public failure and humiliation on the climb, all combining with this religious background that he had and culminating in this, what he calls a mystical experience. I mean, from the outside, to me, it looks more like a psychotic break, a breakdown, a full breakdown. And that's what led to him disappearing, joining this monastery that, as we learn more and more about it, we start to realize is more than a monastery. Um, and and Yeah, I mean, the life journey is just wild. So he goes in this one direction, becoming a super radical Christian in this cult, basically Christian cult. And she and Thomasina goes in her own, also very unconventional direction. They're both just fascinating, unusual, unique characters. She went in this other extreme direction of basically raising her daughter on her own as a single mom in a minivan on the road as a full-time boulderer over the course of the next 10 years. And that is just amazing. I mean, that's something, this is before Sprinter vans. She like didn't really have any support from sponsors or anything like that. She was like the first Canadian woman to send V10, V11, V12. She became kind of a legend, mostly within the core traveling climbing community, for being on the road for a decade with this little baby and toddler and tween in tow, and like sending V12, raising her daughter, homeschooling her, becoming this incredible like political activist along the way, and being like deeply ingrained in the whole like traveling dirtbag climbing culture, and just a fascinating character. So the two of them go off on their own journeys, and eventually, this is the part where I don't want to give any spoilers, things come back around, and you've probably read the stories, people know kind of the gist of it, but when you watch the film, the way the chapters unfold, I think is quite surprising, and you kind of forget what's going to happen. So eventually things come back around, and there's a sense of like, is there any such a thing as redemption, and what does it mean? What is forgiveness, and what is love, and what's right and wrong, and how do flawed people figure out how to go, overcome difficult pasts, and make a life and figure out what's important to them. And I don't know, I just think it's like the most fascinating story that I've ever been involved with on a human level, in terms of trying to tell that story, and the climbing all is the fabric that holds it all together. It was really, really an amazing experience for me to work so closely with them, to get this incredible trust and openness that they had in sharing their stories with me. And then figuring out how to weave it all together in a way that, I mean, that's the ultimate film that I think I've ever made, when it comes to all of those things I was mentioning in the live screening. Like, people are laughing, people are crying. One of the comments I had from a friend who texted me was like, cried my fucking face off. It was like, like, yes, okay. But there's laughs too, and there's gasps, and there's cheering, and there's just like deep thought that happens in between. And so it's a story that I'm really proud of.
Wow, man. Yeah, it was, it really struck me, and I'm not surprised to hear that's one of the best stories you've ever been a part of. And I really just applaud how you put it together and put it out there. And I gotta tell you, this, yeah, Thomasina, this story has been around in the climbing world for a while, but just the part that you told, not the full circle, the closed loop. So yeah, we won't do any spoilers then, because that was just a beautiful trailer. And that story itself was climbing lore. And I think something that doesn't get highlighted as much in the film, or even with us talking about, is just how good a climber Thomasina is. I mean, incredible, just ahead of her time, still out there crushing. And I also wanted to point out that in that first ascent film of Didier trying Cobra Crack and Sonny Trotter ending up doing it, I had said, what happens when people don't send? And when I think back to that film, I hate to say this, I know Sonny Trotter is incredible and iconic. I could never really remember who did the climb. I remember Didier. He was okay, a little behind the scenes. If I don't think these are spoilers, I'm kind of curious. How did he hurt his knee? Do you know how he hurt his knee?
It was like an old injury that he had for years, that he had like always knew that he was supposed to have surgery on, a repair, but he kind of gotten away with it over the years of not having surgery. And he had done a couple little things that made it flare up in that moment. And he was going there like super laser focused to just do this thing to basically save his life. Like, he had it in mind that, like, if I can just do the Cobra Crack, maybe everything will work out. And he talks about how he just wasn't listening to the signs from the world that were telling him otherwise, including his knee being like, dude, this is not going to work. He got there and he literally couldn't even hike up to the base of the climb. And so I think it was just more of a realization that it wasn't in the cards, as opposed to like a specific, accident or something.
Here's a little spoiler alert for everyone in life that has nothing to do with this film. Doing the climb probably won't save your life, whatever that climb is. If you do that white V7 dihedral in the corner, probably not going to save your life. You mentioned that you have to always be more concise with what you show. And it was a long film. And you said that there was probably, chapters that had to, that couldn't make it, even though they were amazing in their own right. Is there anything you can tell us about what got cut that doesn't completely spoil the story?
Well, I mean, one thing that happened in their life journeys is that Thomasina was diagnosed with cancer
Oh my
not long
God.
ago. She had a cancer diagnosis, and she had to go through an entire. She had to beat that. She had to go through an entire process with that, and surgery, and uncertainty about where it would lead, in a relatively, um, you know, pretty serious thing, and that it's like some films that'd be the main story, how you come back from that, and climbing was really important to her in coming back from that, and it was also an important moment and kind of test for them in their relationship, and that's something that just by the time we got to that point in the story, I just didn't think I could. You can't do cancer in a couple minutes, you know what I mean? Like, so that's just the podcast version or the book version. It's fascinating and totally in line with all the surprises that happened in the story, but we just couldn't do it all. So there's some other things, maybe not quite as big as that, but a lot of little details. And then, when they're talking about their relationship and stuff, there's so many details you kind of got to skip over. People can go back and forth and what they felt at a certain moment or what they say about each other, and we weren't trying to get into like nitty gritty back and forth on he said she said stuff. So, um, you know, but
Wow.
just the general arc of it is so fascinating, and I think really really moving and surprising too. That's to me what I'm proud of with the film, with the edit of the film, is that it's surprising when you watch it. Even if you've listened to a podcast from him or read an article, still when you watch it, I think there's moments where you're like, oh, no way. And that's like something that I think makes something really entertaining and holds people's attention. And I think something I'm proud of about the way this story came together.
Yeah, again, I had heard the story and I still had three very distinct moments I can think of where I was did not see that coming, blown away. Uh, so there was a little controversy around this film, and I just wanted to bring that up, and also just kind of the meta question is how do you deal with controversy in these films? You've been doing it for decades, so things always come up. But yeah, can you tell me about some of the controversy that came up around the Cobra and the Heart?
Yeah, announced when we first announced the lineup online of what the films would be this year, we didn't put out a lot of information. We put out a few images and kind of like the names of some of the people and maybe a sentence or two about what each film was about. And it was kind of a slow burn. It took a little while. There were like, I saw one or two people on social kind of roll their eyes a little bit or question certain things. It was a little bit of a slow burn, but at some point there started to be more and more um, talk online and on social from at first very small group of people who were very upset that we had decided to include Thomasina in one of our films. And this was before anybody knew, before anyone had seen the films, before anybody had any real good sense of the scope of these stories or what the films actually were. And the situation with her, basically, to try and, I mean, people can go online and read about it, but to try and summarize what it was, in that decade she had spent living on the road, and even afterwards continuing to climb hard and travel and stuff like that, she became really good friends with a lot of the core bouldering people that were living that life on the road. People, especially people in the key places in Bishop and Hueco, and Salt Lake, that are like on the circuit. And she was close friends with Charlie Barrett over the years. And as most people know by this point, Charlie Barrett was convicted for sexual assault and is now serving a life sentence in prison for that, which he clearly deserves and is a good thing. Justice is being served. He's gotten what he deserved. Um, but Thomasina had known him for many years and had never seen any of his scary sides, and he was someone that she had counted on over the years as part of her support system, as a single mom raising a child on the road, someone kind of living hand to mouth, and he was, very much part of that core scene. So he was someone she was really close with over the years. And when he was convicted, she decided to write him a letter, a character reference letter to the judge to be used in his sentencing. That's something that, happened. It's a standard thing. So he and his father, who I think is one of his big advocates, and some other people in the community, they were searching around for people who'd be willing to write something on his behalf, people who had seen his good side, basically. And frankly, that's part of how the justice system is supposed to work. This is how, like, the judge considers both sides of a person to make a decision about sentencing, and he got the full sentence that he deserved, life in prison. When the public records of the trial came out, and it came out that Thomasina had written this letter, and the letter was made public, some people were really upset to read the letter that she wrote and how positively she had talked about Charlie based on her experience. Some people called her out for that at that time. And she responded in a way that maybe didn't help her case. She wasn't, super apologetic, and she maybe said some things that triggered people a little more. She basically like had for years believed and trusted Charlie, and um, gave her friend the benefit of the doubt, and she was wrong. She was clearly wrong about that. Um, when it came out that we had her in a film, some of those people who were involved with pushing back on her, calling her out, got really upset that we would put her on our platform, that we would include her in a film. Some people made the assumption that oh, it's just because she's a good climber, and that's not why people should be featured on your platform. It's more about morality and stuff like that. And I think we were a little taken aback by the intensity of the outrage that some people had about it. I think I can understand how people who were directly involved with the Charlie Barrett case would be upset, or not be happy to see her being featured, since she was someone who was associated with supporting him. I think we had empathy for people who were directly involved, who were not happy about that, and they had every right to speak up. Um, it did start to kind of balloon into this really coordinated campaign run by a few people who weren't actually necessarily directly involved with the case, and it kind of got, from my perspective, out of hand in terms of the way they circulated misleading information, made a whole set of demands on us, and a whole set of threats about what they would do to disrupt our business, our ability to run a tour, our events. And some of that started to, surface on social and elsewhere. And they actually did, circulate this publicly, circulate versions that aren't public, that are even more intense, to all of our partners and hosts. And it actually became a thing that we had to figure out how to navigate. And it actually took a toll on the tour this year, actually. So, I don't want to get sucked too much into details, because it's like something maybe once time passes, it'd be interesting to dissect. Basically, I think it was something we navigated. It's something, there's a lot of controversy about a lot of films and a lot of things everyone does nowadays. I'm and that's just something we've had to learn to navigate. I mean, when we did the film Resistance Climbing, the level of outrage that we received from Israeli climbers who were horrified that we would dare to tell a story about Palestinian climbers, or even use the word Palestine, was super super aggressive. And there've been other little things that blow up out of nowhere. So it's funny. It's just part of the landscape nowadays. It's part of the media landscape. I think to be a creator and put things out to the world, you have to have a thick skin, and be able to ride things out. You have to be willing to like acknowledge when you make mistakes sometimes too, and you have to be willing to hear people's opinions and understand them. I mean, with the Thomasina thing, I totally understand that some people were hurt by it, but I think there was also a lot of misrepresentation about the situation. She has every right to share her opinion to the judge about her experience. She realized at some point that her judgment about Charlie was wrong. And I think once there was more, that was actually, I think, a really positive outcome of the pushback that we did receive and that she received. It started a real conversation. And it actually led to Thomasina like having a realization that she had been fooled and misled and manipulated by Charlie Barrett for many years. And she had hard conversations with a lot of friends. She reread the whole case. Like, she took this seriously. She's a real thinking person. And she took the time to hear other people's opinions because of that pushback. And she really did change her mind and realize she was wrong, and came out and said that publicly. She apologized. She admitted that she was wrong. She tried to explain a little bit how she had been fooled and recognized that that was harmful. And the people who wanted her to be banished from the community decided not to accept that apology. They decided that it was fake, or that it wasn't good enough for them. And they can think whatever they want, but for people to be able to open their minds and hear criticism and reflect on it and change their mind and act on it, to me, is all you can ask for and the best that humans can do. And then a big part of our thought process too was like, the film itself has nothing to do with those topics. It's an epic story that goes so far beyond, oh, we're platforming Thomasina because she claims to be 11 or whatever. That's just so not what it is. And the idea that we would somehow cancel this entire film, and people were demanding that we pull the film, like the idea that this story doesn't deserve to be told because one of the characters in the story made a mistaken judgment, even though it clearly hurt some people, and apologized for it. Like, that idea just never computed to us. And we always had the feeling that, once people can see the film, I think a majority of people can understand that thought process, because it's just so not about that. And not only that, the film itself, like the themes of the film, are about making mistakes, learning from mistakes, complicated humans who do wrong and try to make it better, about forgiving each other, about supporting each other. And to me, if the meta narrative, if you're aware of the meta narrative behind it, of the effort to cancel Thomasina because of past wrongs, and you watch this film with that in mind, it's like, that's not in the film, but the themes, the way that she is able to forgive, and the way that all the characters in the film are able to try to do better and help each other do better, it really resonates on another level once you've actually watched the film. So I can understand that people were triggered, and I empathize with that, but I think people who can handle it should watch the film and make their judgment based on what the film actually is. And I think that's fair game from there.
I mean, I appreciate you, diving into it. I knew that we had to touch on it, and I hope it doesn't overshadow her story, Didier's story, the story you guys put together. And I think it's important to emphasize a few things that you said there, where a lot of the pushback came before the film was even released. And so it's just, I think it's important to see the film and recognize that what we're talking about in these last couple of minutes are not part of the film. We're not in the film, but then I loved how you brought it kind of full circle, and there's some themes that apply here as well. And life is not simple. Life is not simple, and bad things happen. Forgiveness hopefully happens, and moving forward always happens. And I'm glad we touched on it. I encourage everyone to watch it and make their own judgment too. So thanks for touching on that. I also got to point out that one of the films in Real Rock 19 kind of had a touch of controversy deeply woven in. It was Death of Villains with Joe Kinder and Kai Leitner, which was a really fun one too, on a massively steep roof. And yeah, tell me about that one.
Yeah, so Death of Villains, I mean, it's Kai Leitner's story. You know, he's someone who we've featured in the past in Real Rock when he was the teen phenom, you know, winning all the comps and, you know, making a name for himself. And now we're coming back to revisit his journey 10 years later. And his journey also has not been simple. And, you know, it is somewhat of a parallel redemption story. He describes the struggles that he went through as a teenager as he was growing into his bigger body and starting to feel like maybe that was pushing him out of the competitive climbing scene. And he began to really struggle with disordered eating. And that haunted him for a long time and basically kind of pushed him out of the really top end climbing scene. Because Kai is such a smart and motivated and amazing guy, you know, even though he wasn't like competing at the top level or doing the hardest climbs, he used that time incredibly productively, went to school, got a business degree, started climbing for change, became this incredible activist to introduce climbing to underrepresented communities, and, you know, stayed in the mix and has been a hugely positive influence on the climbing community. But he wasn't at the tip top performance of his game for a lot of years there. And so at some point he decided he wanted to kind of like explore that avenue again, even though now in his full grown body, I think he's like 6'3", 195, something like that. I mean, he's a big, strong man. And, you know, in most sports that would be like entry level, but in climbing,
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's pretty uncommon for someone, I mean, kind of actually unheard of for someone that size to climb at the top level. And he kind of wanted to see what he could do, coming back. And that's where on that journey, his story intersects with Joe Kinder, who, you know, most people listening probably know the basics of him being this, you know, incredible route developer and wild character and guy who was, you know, intensely canceled for being an idiot at one point years ago. Most people know, so I don't really want to go into the blow by blow, but, you know, we tell that story, and it's kind of a surprise intersection of these two really kind of opposite characters, and how they judge each other and learn about each other and eventually support each other. And they have a lot of hard conversations about what's right and wrong in the sport of climbing, and related to eating disorders, and relating to Joe's past stupid posts that he'd done. And yeah, I mean, there are some similar themes to the to the Cobra story with forgiveness and redemption and making mistakes and being flawed humans and having productive conversations about it. And some ironies, you know, in the fact that you're talking in the Death of Villain story. It's, you know, it's about online bullying and cancellation, and then the reaction to the Thomasina thing to me veered pretty close to online bullying and cancellation, which I thought was pretty ironic. So all really relevant stuff, and all rooted in amazing climbing. Kai trying to do his hardest climb ever. Joe like being this incredible underground force of a developer and a incredible support system for Kai in this really surprising way. But that, you know, that film specifically leans into the controversy and addresses it, which means I don't think I have to say as much about it. Whereas the Cobra film, you know, it's like a whole side thing. But in this case, watch the film, we dissect it. Those guys talk really openly and earnestly about it. Kai's written really, really movingly about it as well. So, you know, I think people will draw their own conclusions about where the line lies in terms of behavior and forgiveness and the whole climbing culture, but it tackles it head on. And that was something we meant to do from the beginning.
I like that you're willing to tackle this stuff head on. And something that is fascinating is that these these top sends, these amazing hard climbs, often do seem to have a really cool story behind them. And I feel like that's something to be said about the evolution of media and what you guys have done. I mean, we talked a little bit about that intense behind the scenes for Chris on Pontas, and at the time that wasn't woven in, but it was a cutting edge send. And so makes me think like there's probably more going on in all of these hard sends. People don't usually reach the pinnacle of what they do without an interesting journey. You know,
Mm.
it's very, I don't know, it's tough to be one of the best without going through some deep introspection, and oftentimes you have inflection points that veer you into excellence due to just hyper focus from extreme events. So
Mm.
I love hearing these big stories. It makes me wonder about what, Real Rock 2029 will be, or sorry, not Real Rock 2029, Real Rock 29. But when you look at this trajectory you guys have gone through, where are you guys heading?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know. Climbing changes, filmmaking changes, cultural vibes change. I don't know. I just hope we can make it there. We'll see. It's not easy to keep coming up with good stories and finding new ways to express them year after year. I think there's a likelihood. I think there are new voices coming up and new storytellers developing right now who will probably have interesting ways to look at climbing through new lenses, and shift up the vibe a little bit. I could see that becoming more in the mix. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think variety, to me, variety is super important. Not every film can be a tearjerker. Not every film can be a cutting edge send. And so within each lineup, we strive for some variety in the style of climbing, in the characters, and in the style of the filmmaking and the storytelling as well. So, I mean, this year the third film, uh, Riders on the Storm, that's really the opposite end of the spectrum of the other two. I mean, this is Sean Villanueva and Nico Favres and Siba Van Hey, who people might not know as much, but it's kind of his big introduction in our world. This new character on the scene, and Drew Smith, who's an amazing American alpinist and photographer who did a lot of the shooting on the wall. These guys went on this trip down to Patagonia, and they did the first free ascent of this kind of legendary big wall project that was first put up as an aid route in the 90s, and teams had tried over the decades. It was kind of considered, one of these really obvious like next things to do as a big free climb. And so that story, those guys filmed the whole thing. You're asking before about how stories come to be and how we choose which things. These guys we've worked with, Sean and Nico, we've worked with, several times over the years. They're incredibly wild characters. They're unbelievable adventure climbers. I mean, the stuff they do is outrageous, living on walls for weeks at a time and sticking to their guns in terms of style of climb and doing really bold, really wild, hard stuff, but also just having so much fun doing it. I mean, that's to me what makes them stand out and makes this film stand out. We wanted this film to just be adventurous, fun, fast, funny, everything that everything that could complement the other two films. And it plays in the middle of the two, like the way we played it on the tour. Online, people can watch whatever order they want, but on the tour, it's a very conscious order choice. You watch the Death of Villains film first, and then Riders on the Storm and Cobra last. And having the Riders on the Storm in between the two is a great reset because it's funny as hell, and there's nobody cries, which is nice, and it's just good old fashioned wild adventure. I mean, they're on the wall for 18 days. The whole thing is scripted. So going back to the writing thing and storytelling, I worked closely with Nico and Sean and Siba to write a script for them to narrate the film. The whole thing's narrated, which is kind of a departure. Every once in a while we do that, but in this case, it really gives you leeway as a storyteller to shape things the way you want and to make jokes. Most of the funny things are things that happen in the footage where they just do crazy shit. But if you can have them set the joke up in a scripted way, then that makes those moments really pop. So And one thing that's kind of fun we did narratively is actually like switch the narrators along the way, which I've never seen in this genre of film before, where someone's talking you through the story, then all of a sudden at this weird, unexpected, kind of crazy moment, it switches and the other guy takes the mic and starts narrating, and they're kind of calling bullshit on each other and joking around the whole time. So it's the opposite end of the spectrum, and it gets the big adventure in there that the other films don't. These guys are in this unbelievable blizzard for like a week. I mean, it's snowing feet and feet on them, ice storms and wind, and they're going up there and chopping ice off every single hold between before trying to like do the first free ascent of these like 512 plus 13 minus pitches, in minus zero conditions. So that was a really fun film to make too, and I think it complements the other two really well as far as style, variety of style, and style of climbing, and just keeping the big adventure there, and not trying to do too much beyond the climbing and the laughs and the character vibe.
It was hilarious. Those guys are freaking hilarious and kind of staples in the media of just their vibe is amazing. And I grew up always reading stories of kind of alpine climbing and mountaineering. And it was definitely like a suffer fest. Like it was very miserable. And I don't know, I ate that up, although I ended up just doing normal rock climbing, but I just always ate it up as like Hardman, and then they're so silly. They actually almost seem almost a little insane. Like it's like they're doing that stuff and they're having fun. And I almost I was really surprised at this part where they're sitting in their tents and then they kind of show the conditions that they're in. Like you think, oh no, you have to sit in a tent and it sucks. And they shows the pad that he's sleeping on, and it's just and not just drenched. There's standing water there. Everything is miserable, and just that little quick juxtaposition of like they're playing music, they're laughing, and it's like, no, the suffering is still there. And I really had a good time with that one too. I loved it.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the takeaways with that juxtaposition is that Siba's kind of the relatively young gun, kind of trying to figure out how to do big things in this world, and partnering with these guys and having always looked up to these guys. And Sean and Nico, with their experience, I mean, they're in their mid 40s. They've been doing it for years. They might not be like at the pinnacle of strength. Siba's stronger than him. He gets the hardest pitches, but these guys have the wisdom of what it takes to do a climb like this, to succeed on a big well. And for me, one of the key takeaways is like, you have to have fun, otherwise you're going to go down. Like you say, like, yeah, you're lying in a pool of 2 inches of water and your down sleeping bag is soaked through for days, and you haven't gotten out of the portaledge for 3 or 4 days, and the wind is blowing so hard you're wondering if the ledge is just going to tear open. And most people go down, and these guys don't. And the only reason they don't is because they've learned how to embrace the suffering, how to have fun along the way. They play their music. They don't take it too seriously. They're not checking the forecast every 5 minutes. They're enjoying the little indulgences like Nico's popcorn along the way. And that's kind of what it takes, and that's the wisdom, I think.
Ah, good stuff. That was really good. Well, thanks for taking us through this whole evolution, and also I just got to tell you, I really appreciate this really high quality, high production climbing. I mean, of course, I follow people on Instagram. Of course, I film myself and all my sends. But I just, when I think about what I want to show my mom, if I was going to show her how cool climbing is, what I'm doing, that's what you guys put out. And so I just love that you've really, yeah, made climbing badass, made it beautiful. And I appreciate you take us on the journey. And my last question for you, Josh, is how do you go from good to great?
Yeah, well, good to great. It's a great phrase. I know it from the Jim Collins book called Good to Great, which is a really classic piece of business literature. And Jim Collins is a climber. He lives in Boulder. I read that book a while ago and took a lot of its lessons to heart. I actually have a Boulder problem that I named Good to Great. Really, really rad one that I was proud of, and that meaning that phrase had meaning for me in that moment of my life. And he shares a lot of wisdom and a few key takeaways about basically what it takes for big businesses to go from good to great. And he, in the book, he interviews Tommy Caldwell. Maybe it was in his next book, but I think it was in that book, right? He interviews Tommy. He had climbed with Tommy a bunch, and he interviews all kinds of different people who are, the top in their field, and he asks them these same kinds of questions, what their lessons are, um, and I've talked to Tommy about the conversations he's had with Jim Collins over the years, climbing with him, and just talking to him about how do people get good at things. Jim's always looking for business lessons. Tommy's looking for climbing lessons. One of the things that stuck with me from that book, and having discussed it with Tommy too, is the hedgehog concept um, that Jim outlines, and I think it comes originally from an Aesop fable, where there's the story of the fox and the hedgehog, and the fox is this wily creature who's always trying to catch the hedgehog, and the fox is smart, the fox is strong, fast, clever, has all these tricks and all these different ways to try to get the hedgehog. The hedgehog only has one way to defend itself, which is just curl up into a ball with its spikes sticking out. And it always works. The hedgehog is the best in the world at this one thing, which is curling up into a ball and protecting itself in that way. The fox can't get it. And Jim uses this analogy to talk about businesses where certain CEOs have sat back and thought about, what is the one thing we can do better than anyone else? And how can we take that to its ultimate extension to be the best in the world by far at that one thing? And I think, a lot of businesses have figured out how to do that. A lot of businesses can be pretty good at a lot of things, but can you be the absolute best at one thing, ideally something big and important, if you want to, be really successful? But it's a conscious choice that some businesses make. And I think Tommy has talked about how he made that choice with the Dawn Wall. So his thought process, I think, and is like, coming up through the years, he was really good at a lot of different things. He was really good at sport climbing. He did competitions. He did hard trad climbs, and he did big wall climbs. When he lost his finger, he kind of realized he probably wouldn't be able to get quite back to the top level of sport climbing or bouldering, where it's really just about pure raw power, and it comes down to like every millimeter of contact with the rock. And I think he thought to himself, what's the one thing, what's the hedgehog concept as a climber that where I could like be the absolute best ever? And he landed on big wall free climbing. He was already really good at it. He had put in the time, he had the experience, the wisdom, the technical aspects. He had done a lot of the hard free climbs. Maybe he was already the best. Maybe the Hoobers are in the mix. I'm not sure with the timeline, but he realized that if he put everything into this one goal for a period of time, he might be able to take it to whole new levels that no one had ever imagined. And that's what he did with the Dawn Wall. And we witnessed that process with him, from being up there on the wall, filming him doing it, and organizing his whole year around preparing for that. And he did it. He changed the world of climbing by focusing on this one thing that he was the best at. And I think, in a smaller way, I think we've kind of done the same thing with our films. Like, a lot of people get into making a certain kind of film and they want to branch out. And it's like, oh, maybe we could start the mountain biking film tour, or maybe I really want to be in Hollywood or something like that. And um, for me personally, I've just always been so passionate about doing this one thing and sharing this the energy of this community and giving back to climbing and sticking with it. I could have made 2 or 3 films and been like, yeah, okay, let me get like a real job on a production company or something. But sticking with it, like, what the one thing that I pretty much know I can do better than almost anyone else, or we as a team can do better than pretty much anyone else in the world, is tell amazing stories about climbing, and do it in a way that's like fun and beautiful and inspiring, and climbers appreciate and respect, and other people also can relate to and be inspired by. And so, it takes dedication to get there. I think, a lot of when it comes to just the climbing piece of it, I think a lot of climbers take the approach, and you'll hear the advice a lot of times: focus on your weakness, be well-rounded, and there's obviously something to that, especially in the early phases, I think, of just getting to a certain the good level. But maybe if your real goal is to be the absolute best and to push your singular pursuit as far as you possibly can, really taking your strengths to their full extension, the full logical extension, believing in your own vision, and taking it as far as you possibly can. That might be what changes the game, or what makes you great. I don't know. That's one way to think of it.
That was great, man. Thanks for sharing a little bit of the Genesis story that no one actually has heard about. Probably a lot of people haven't read that Jim Collins book, don't recognize that he's a climber, but I read it actually more in my finance days, probably 15, 20 years ago, but it always stood out to me as just being something that was really interesting. It's being good is cool. Who doesn't want to be good? Something being great is kind of, I think, what we all secretly are striving for. And I love that you pointed out the conscious choice of it, the hedgehog concept of saying, okay, this is what I could be the best at, and I'm going to put my all into it, and then sticking with it for decades. I think that's that part that you could have inspiration in a moment, but then sticking with it, that can often be the toughest part. And Josh, that was a blast, man. You are one of the best climbing filmmakers to ever be, and I hope you keep it up. And just thanks for sharing, man. That was really fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I enjoy talking about this stuff, obviously, and it's fun to talk about it with someone who's who knows some of the background and has questions and has stuff to dig in on. So it's really fun.
Well, for everyone listening that wants to hear or wants to see all those clips that we talked about, whether it's the latest Real Rock or, gosh, your other massive backlog, whether it's the dosages or king lines, you can go on to, is it realrock.com? Remind me the website.
Yeah, it's realrocktour.com. And then, it's a click from there to get to the actual, like, our streaming platform, Real Rock Unlimited, which is where you can actually watch the new films. And we have almost every film we've ever made on there too. So some of them are available a la carte to rent or buy. You can subscribe for $100 a year and watch basically almost everything we've ever made as much as you want. There's a little app, so you can download the app on your phone. You can watch stuff when you're offline. I don't know. We get messages every once in a while for someone who's like at the base of a classic climb, like rewatching the dosage film from 20 years ago, trying to get the beta or something. That's kind of fun. But yeah, we just want to make it possible for people to watch stuff in whatever way they can, whatever way fits with their level of psych and means, So we've got the rental option available. We've got a bunch of stuff is on YouTube. Some of the iconic climbs on our Real Rock YouTube channel, like Pontas is on there, and a bunch of other really big moments are on there to watch stuff for free. And then we're posting a lot of clips and stuff on Instagram as well, so people can follow us at Real Rock and keep up with what we're doing.
Well, I like that you guys have been innovative on that model along with the tour. And way to bring into the 21st century, the 2020s with even having an app. I do like watching beta videos at the bottom. It's always that thing, you go on a trip and then you're watching the video that got you psyched to go on the trip, like the night before. You're in Mallorca, you can't climb at midnight, or you shouldn't, because you might dislocate your shoulder jumping off, and you're getting psyched by watching those videos that you guys created. So I'll link in the show notes, and good stuff, man. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.